If you were to ask some regular person, hey, what is libertarianism about? They would probably say it's about being able to do what you want. It's about freedom, it's about rights, it's probably about limited government, and being peaceful and anti war. And that person would be right. Those are all part of the ideology. I would basically sum it up as the following: Libertarians believe that respect for individuals is the central requirement of justice. And moreover, granting everyone a wide scope of economic and personal freedom leads to good outcomes, while restricting those freedoms leads to bad outcomes. And for the philosophy guys who are watching, you will notice that those are two different types of claims being made. Deontological arguments like that first point try to establish that libertarian institutions are intrinsically just in and of themselves, whereas consequentialist arguments like that second point try to establish that libertarian institutions are useful for generating good outcomes. Let's look at a few of the main types of libertarians that can be divided amongst these lines. Natural rights libertarians assume, like John Locke, that people have property within their own person, and as self-owners they can extend their ownership over external goods by mixing their labor with natural resources. Natural rights libertarians believe in what's called negative liberty, which is the freedom from coercion or freedom from others, as opposed to positive liberty, freedom to do something. Robert Nozick, for example, believed that the proper role of the state was to protect negative liberty. They face a number of criticisms. The self that you're owning is normally a product of luck, and it's based on your genetic endowments at birth or the environment that you're born in. And yeah, even if you own yourself, it's not clear that mixing your labor with natural resources makes those natural resources yours. That's just stipulated by John Locke. You have consequentialist libertarians who normally tend to be economists, and their arguments normally sound utilitarian. The consequentialists normally argue in favor of free exchange and the free market and argue against government policy. So if you've ever heard of the tragedy of the commons or of the invisible hand, you've heard a consequentialist argument. Also, if you've ever heard that prohibition of drugs creates unsafe black markets, or that increased taxes leads to less growth, that minimum wage laws lead to unemployment amongst the poor, then you've heard consequentialist libertarian arguments against government policy. James Buchanan was a pioneer in what's called public choice economics, which points out that government actors are just as self-centered and self-interested as private economic actors. And when you ask the government to come into a marketplace, you may end up with the problem of rent seeking and disperse costs with concentrated benefits. Also for consequentialists is the kind of conservative argument that traditional institutions that arise peacefully through social cooperation exist for a reason and shouldn't be attacked by the state. F.A. Hayek speaks of this in his Use of Knowledge in Society essay. The criticism of consequentialists is that their arguments don't necessarily lead toward libertarianism. Maybe the government does fail, maybe the free market does help in some cases, but that doesn't mean we should all therefore be libertarians. We should just be more market oriented. And other libertarians tend to look at the consequentialists as being squishy libertarians, if you will. Like they're not strong enough libertarians because they may be persuaded to agree to a little government action, right? If a tax on yachts could actually lead to eradicating some type of, I don't know, child poverty, the consequentialists might be for it. And so it can be a bit of a fragile form of libertarianism. And then you have the anarcho-capitalist libertarians who argue that no state is morally justified and that trade, production, all cooperation should just be voluntary. ANCAPs believe that all institutions should face competition and that law, police, and courts can be provided for a price just like anything else. So the criticisms that the ANCAPs face are, where are all the examples of ANCAP societies? In the post-industrial West right now, can this really come into fruition? The only example that most ANCAPs have been able to provide of an example of their idea would be medieval Iceland. The next criticism is the idea of national defense. How do you provide for that? Because it is a public good. Imagine trying to establish anarcho-capitalist society next to an expansionist asshole neighbor of a country, like, I don't know, Russia. And then finally there's this question of absolute property rights. Right now, most Western civilization does have very strong property rights recognized by society and the government. Murray Rothbard believes that they're not strong enough and that it should go further. But why? Why should we experiment with his speculation about anarcho-capitalist societies when we have pretty good societies right now? Canada, the United States may not be as free as we would like, but they are not totalitarian hellscapes. And then you have the kind of virtue and ethics centered libertarians like objectivists. These type of libertarians believe that just institutions allow humans to develop as virtuous agents, but those institutions should be hands off. Imagine a game of basketball or baseball in which the referee is trying to, instead of just enforce the rules, he's trying to only enforce the rules in search of a goal. If a referee only blows his whistle because he wants to make the game fun, he's going to fail and he's going to make that game less fun for everybody. His goal is just to enforce the rules. It's everybody else's goal to make the game fun. And that's how they believe the government should be. Flourishing is self-directed and agent relative. And Ayn Rand believed in ethical egoism, which is to say she believed that morality is for our own good and for our own sake to make us better people, not necessarily for society to enforce. Now, there are many different flavors of libertarianism. I'm not going into all of them. I did want to hit on some of the big ones. Most of the libertarians you'll meet are working within one of these frameworks. And most libertarians normally switch between making deontological arguments and consequentialist arguments without even knowing. I personally am much more of a consequentialist than most libertarians, but I agree with many of the different flavors, and I also agree with many of the flavors' criticisms. If you consider yourself to be a liberal in the classical sense of that word, which is to say that you believe that people have certain rights that shouldn't be easily overridden by the state, then there may be a flavor of libertarianism for you. Thanks for watching.